Good afternoon, folks. It's Wednesday, March 26th, and this is our fourth EPIP webinar of 2014, Catalyzing Change with Communications and Comedy. I'm your EPIP host, Michael Barham, and our speakers for today are Mik and Miriam Fogelson. They come from Moore and Associates. It's a cutting-edge communications firm. They do a lot of work with nonprofits, foundations, and in the political arena. They're going to take us through some of their work today and also tell us why we should take more risks and consider investing in culture. So before we get started, for those of you unfamiliar with EPIP, we are a national network of foundation professionals and social entrepreneurs. We strive for excellence in the practice of philanthropy. Our mission is to develop emerging leaders committed to building a just, equitable, and sustainable society. A few announcements. Many of you have hopefully already heard, but our 2014 National Conference, the Unity Summit, is coming up in just a few months. We are partnering with the Joint Affinity Groups. It's going to be taking place from June 5th to June 8th in Washington, D.C. We're going to be talking about collaborating to advance equity. It's going to be a fabulous conference. Registration is now open, so please visit our website for more information, but it's going to be really exciting. Also, those of you who love our EPIP webinars, our fifth webinar of the year is next Wednesday, same time, April 2nd. It's Social Impact Bonds 102. We're going to be inviting back our favorite social enterprise fellows from NYU, and they're going to be taking us on a deeper dive into the use of social impact bonds in the United States. And as always, for national events or events near you, you can visit epip.org/events and check out what's coming up. Any of you not EPIP members, you should consider joining. We have a lot of exciting learning opportunities, conferences, local events, national events slated for the rest of the year. So if you're interested, visit our website, epip.org/membership, or contact me. I'm here to answer all sorts of questions. Alrighty, just a few important items for housekeeping before I pass it over to Mik and Miriam. You're all going to be on mute for the webinar. If you are calling in on the phone, please be sure to mute your computer to avoid an echo. If you're having any questions, any difficulty hearing anyone, please use the question box, and you can also submit questions for Mik and Miriam throughout the webinar. We'll take note of them, and we've reserved a few segments for Q&A, so we'll be sure to share those with Mik and Miriam when the time is right. And we are recording this webinar, so if for any reason you need to hop off, you'll be able to find it on our EPIP YouTube channel, and we'll also be sharing it with all attendees afterwards. So without further ado, I am going to pass it over to Miriam and Mik. Hey, guys.
Hi.
Hey.
So, let's go to the next slide.
So my name is Mik. I just wanted to start by thanking Mike and EPIP for inviting us to do this webinar. We actually share office space in the Center for Social Innovation, so we're neighbors, and Miriam has the advantage of being in the office with Mike. I'm actually at a separate location right now. So briefly, I wanted to go over the goals for the webinar. We tried to keep it pretty concise. There's two things that we're going to focus on today. The first is we want to demonstrate the value to organizations and nonprofits of taking greater risks with their communications. And we'll explain a little bit more about what we mean, but in our work, a lot of our clients are nonprofit organizations, and we've worked in the social change space, both Miriam and I, for many years. And one of the challenges we find all the time is that nonprofits really want to make a difference and have a big impact and reach a lot of people, but they're also extremely risk averse. And so we want to talk a little bit about what the value of not being so risk averse is, what you can get out of it, and in particular what comedy can do, and how important it can be to be willing to utilize comedy even around the most serious of issues. So that's our first goal. And the second is to speak a little bit to what we think foundations could be doing differently, particularly in making a deeper investment in cultural change. We have a pretty good sense of the landscape, the funding landscape in this area, and there is, in our opinion, a real shortage of funds committed to support social change, cultural change efforts in social change nonprofits, and we'll spend part of our time talking about some of our experiences in that sector and some recommendations that we have about what foundations might do differently to take advantage of the power of cultural change. Great. Next slide.
Great. Hi everyone. This is Miriam Fogelson. I'm a senior associate at Moore and Associates, and we just wanted to give you a little overview about Moore and Associates. Michael gave us a great introduction, but just in summary, Moore and Associates is a boutique communications consulting firm based in New York City, and we focus on strategic communications and developing creative advocacy and political campaigns. Our clients are all social change nonprofits, foundations, political campaigns, and political committees. And our work is really focused on elevating the fantastic work that our clients are doing, largely online, but we also do offline work, and it's usually focused on developing creative, risk-taking, out-of-the-box solutions with a large emphasis on culture and comedy. And as you see here, this is an overview of some of the clients that we've worked with, some of our foundation partners around here, as well as super PACs, political campaigns, and social change nonprofits. So Mik, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Yeah, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So there's three things that Moore and Associates does in our campaign work. The first are public voice campaigns, the second is a focus on comedy, and the third is our partnership with creative professionals. I'm going to talk briefly about public voice campaigns and then turn it back over to Miriam. So we call these public voice campaigns, I don't know if anyone else in the field uses the term, but for some reason we like it. Basically what often happens is a nonprofit or a project will say, you know, we want to create a viral video. Can you do that for us? And what we say is that we don't do video work in isolation, or a photo project in isolation. That it's part of a much larger campaign, really a comprehensive effort to utilize communications tools in the service of some social change goal. And those tools can range from web video, which we do a lot of, to microsites, shareable graphics and GIFs, hashtags, blog posts, user-generated content, guerrilla marketing, traditional media, and every campaign that we work on, we try to have a call to action with it. And when you take all these things and you put them all together, you really maximize your impact and your reach. And also, when you're working in video, you increase the chances that the core content of your campaign will go viral, will break through, and reach the audience that you're seeking.
Great. So another core element of our work is comedy, and we feel like comedy is a really effective tool to integrate into our campaigns for several reasons. One is, in a really crowded, oversaturated media environment, campaigns that include comedy just stand out. They grab people's attention, they get views, they make people want to share the content. We do a lot of web video and largely try to integrate comedy into our videos, and we've just received much better results that way. Through comedy, you can also address really difficult truths and issues that are uncomfortable to talk about. And it's a way to introduce a new angle on an existing issue and just either contribute to an existing conversation, introducing new ideas, or starting a new conversation. And we found that comedy is also a really effective tool to get people to take action. They see the videos, they get excited, and they click, they go to the website, they sign a petition, whatever it is. We just find that we have more success in galvanizing people through comedy. And the example here that you're seeing is from one of the videos that we produced for a super PAC client during the 2012 presidential election. And the video you may have seen, it was called Wake the Fuck Up. And the goal was really to galvanize Obama's base at a point in the election cycle where it wasn't clear what the outcome was going to be. And we felt that a lot of Obama supporters from 2008 needed to be reminded about what was at stake in this election. And we worked with a really incredible creative team, Adam Mansbach, who wrote the fake children's book, Go the Fuck to Sleep, and Boaz Yakin, which is Hollywood movie producer, director, and just produced one of the videos that was most widely viewed during the presidential election, and largely it was because of this risk-taking, humorous angle. So another key strategy with our work is partnering with creative professionals. And this can both be higher profile folks that you recognize like Sarah Silverman, Rosie Perez, Samuel Jackson, and working professionals, musicians, artists, designers, producers. And we found that there's some really important aspects of working with creative professionals to make sure that the project is a success. One of them is really getting to know the creatives that you're working with and understanding what their interests are, and then finding projects to engage them in. So you have much greater success at getting buy-in from your partners if they actually really care about the issue. They're likely to stay involved versus just showing up, getting their picture taken, and moving on. We've also found that it's really important to really respect creatives, especially more high-profile talent as creative partners, and really harnessing their expertise in both shaping the content of the project, shaping the message, being willing to really engage them from the beginning of a project versus just having them show up and reading a few lines at a video shoot. Our projects that were really driven by creatives have been much more original and effective and unique. And we also dedicate a good amount of time to getting to know creatives, especially in the comedy sector. So that's a part of my job, is going out to shows, going to comedy festivals, kind of scouting out comics that we feel have a political bent and would be great partners on our project. So it's getting to know the talent as well as the managers, the producers. We do cultivation events within the entertainment industry to find partners to work with us on our advocacy projects. And the way that works is that through getting to know folks in the comedy industry in particular, we're able to identify what their interests are and develop projects with them, and then find our advocacy partners. And also when we get new clients and they have an idea for a campaign, we know, we can identify folks in the comedy world or the entertainment industry that care about their issue, and then develop effective projects together. And this image here is a music video campaign that we did during the election, 2012 election. And the idea really came about by two musicians that are friends of ours, and they had an idea for this project, and then together we built it out into actually a campaign and brought in a bunch of creatives to partner with us on this project.
All right, so that was all sort of background on Moore and Associates and what we see as sort of our unique approach to doing work in this space. Now I want to jump into the first of our two goals for this webinar, and this is looking at risk-taking by nonprofits. So you see the slide: no risk, no reward. Great image of the immigrant rights movement right now, undocumented and unafraid, the effort by undocumented folks to come out. One of the challenges that we see over and over again is just a real risk-averse tendencies inside nonprofit organizations. And part of it, right, as you all know, stems from the fact that people are worried about losing their funding, they're worried about alienating somebody, and in progressive movements or social change communities, there's also sort of a lot of sensitivities, some of it justifiable, right? To to not want to sort of get anyone on our own side sort of angry or upset. And that creates an environment that can stifle creativity to the detriment of the organizations and their ability to be effective. So go ahead and move to the next slide. So the Great Schlep is a project that I worked on. Actually predates my firm, but it was actually in some ways my learning experience doing this campaign inspired my decision to create the firm, and really reflects the approach that we take with a lot of our projects. So in 2008, I created with a friend of mine named Ari Wallach a PAC that did a number of projects to help mobilize Jewish support for then candidate Obama. The one that you may have heard of, the one that got the most attention, was called The Great Schlep. It centered around a video by Sarah Silverman, but the core message of it was that grandkids who believed in Obama should talk to their grandparents who were suspicious of Obama about why they cared about him. And it was a fascinating campaign. It provides some really interesting examples of what you can do with risk taking. But what was the sort of the biggest risk within this campaign was really the subject matter. And we'll show a short video now that sort of gives you a sense of how the campaign went. But what Sarah did in her video and what we tried to do through this campaign was to basically say that families needed to have an uncomfortable conversation about race and racism, and the role that it was playing in determining how people were going to vote. And that this was something that was often ignored or brushed over, but that it couldn't be ignored in this case, and people needed to talk about it. So go ahead to the next slide. We'll watch the video, and then I'll explain a little bit about what you're going to see. And I'll apologize in advance. The audio may not be as loud as it should be, but hopefully you can follow it.
Yes, and folks, we'll be sharing the video separately along with some other resources after the webinar. It's definitely a great video, so be sure to check it out separately outside of the webinar as well. So we'll get it started.
McCain and Obama are in a dogfight over Florida. All going to boil down to a few old Jews in Century Village.
The smear going around that Senator Barack Obama was a Muslim.
And this is a year when more Jews are going to be voting Republican than ever before.
Truthfully, our colors are different.
If Barack Obama doesn't become the next president of the United States, I'm going to blame the Jews. I am.
Get your fat Jewish asses on a plane to Florida. Call in the grandkids.
The Great Schlep begins. Great Schlep. Great Schlep. Great Schlep.
Great Schlep.
The Great Schlep. Mike Bender is a schlepper. More than 100 have to fall when the year is picked. This election may all come down to a one-on-one conversation with a grandson. Florida has gone for Senator Obama.
I'm kind of changing my own mind and saying to myself, people are people.
Great. So the video was in a sort of an effort to provide a kind of an overview of what the campaign was about. It included at its core a video, but also a ton of media outreach. There was an actual mobilization of people down to Florida. There was technology that allowed people to set up their own schleps to different cities. There were talking points that enabled phone calls to happen. And there were shareable graphics. We had a presence on social media. So it was, from the outside, looking at it from a distance, it was a successful viral video. But what actually made it successful was the combination, the bringing together of all of these elements to ultimately, we think, have some impact on how a community voted for president. So. So that's one example I wanted to cite. There's a second. We go to the next slide.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. Great. So I'll turn it over to Miriam to talk about a campaign that we did more recently for immigration reform called Fedoras for Fairness.
So the Fedoras for Fairness campaign was an immigration reform campaign for We Belong Together, which itself was a joint campaign of the National Domestic Workers Alliance and National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. And they came to us last January. They anticipated that immigration reform legislation will be moving forward last spring, and their mission was to really lift up immigration reform as an issue that impacts women and families. And they want to introduce sort of a new spin on this issue in an attempt to galvanize a new base of voters who weren't already engaged as immigration reform activists. So their goal was really to mobilize women to get behind their agenda. And they hired us to develop a campaign strategy that would reach women and lift up immigration reform as an issue that impacts women and families. So in thinking about how to reach this audience, we decided to use two strategies. One was to target fashion media, because that's a place that a lot of women frequent, and women that are sort of outside the base of your usual suspects for immigration reform activists, and also photo sharing sites and social media sites. That's where women populate those sites more than men, and sites like Instagram and Facebook. We just felt like that was a really effective way to reach women. So we developed a photo-based campaign, and the idea was to use fedoras as a symbol for immigration reform that treats women fairly. And the campaign was modeled after other campaigns that use fashion symbols to be identified with an issue, like the pink ribbon for breast cancer or the red campaign that Gap did in support of AIDS. So when we were starting to put this campaign together, we knew that we needed to bring together a really creative team of folks that had connections in the fashion world. And so we went to Rosie Perez, who we worked with during the election, knowing that she really cared about immigration reform and also has relationships in the fashion world. And Rosie became a total champion of the project and a total partner throughout the project. And she brought in a friend of hers that was the creative director at Interview Magazine, has his own creative firm, and the campaign is developed from there. So there was two different pieces of the campaign. One was more of a high-profile fashion element that would target fashion media. So you're looking at two images from that part of the campaign. And we did a photo shoot with Albert Watson, who's a fashion photographer that shoots for Vogue and all the other major fashion magazines, and brought together a group of artists and models and actors and directors that they themselves are immigrants, their parents are immigrants, they have relationships to immigration reform, and did a photo and video shoot. And you're looking at two of those photos here, and those photos ran in the T section of the T magazine of New York Times Magazine. It ran on other fashion media sites and a wide range of fashion and other media outlets. And then there's a second component of the campaign which focused more on photo sharing. So the idea was that these photos of folks like Rosie and Julianne Moore and Christy Turlington and a bunch of other folks that were in the more of the high fashion shoot, after those photos ran, they would then inspire this photo sharing campaign. So the way that worked was we hired a bunch of photographers who are not at the status of Albert Watson. They're working photographers, and they went to different immigration reform marches and photographed other folks just around the city and in different immigration reform groups wearing the fedora as a symbol, finding out why this campaign matters to them. And we started to share those images on social media through Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And that then spawned this movement where people would take their own photos in a fedora with text and hashtag them and put them up on social media. And those photos all were populated on our website through a feed. So the idea here was taking a risk, having this kind of two-tiered approach, using a lot of different types of technology, going on the hope that the campaign would take off and people would start to use the symbol and participate, and they did. And it's been a really interesting campaign to watch it evolve both online and then offline. The We Belong Together campaign started to use the fedora as a symbol at all of their actions in Washington, D.C. People would show up at rallies across the country wearing fedoras. We printed a really beautiful tabloid of the high fashion photos, and that was used as a tool to bring to visits to the Senate, just to have something that would make their message stand out. And that's, again, overarching goal with all of our work, is just to help our clients and their campaigns really stand out above the noise of all the other messages that are out there. So I think that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, I'll just two quick things, because our next slide is you can go to the next slide, which is our question slide. So that's you listening on the phone if you have a question. But just briefly, we wanted to take this first sort of few slides to talk about risk-taking and comedy, because again, we feel like it's something we've experimented with and had success in, and we didn't include examples of folks who we pushed to take a risk and didn't, or examples we know of from outside of our work where people have been reluctant to take risks. But you probably encounter this in your own work, and it's fairly prevalent. There were a lot of people who told me that the Great Schlep campaign wouldn't work because it was insulting to old people, or there was too much cursing in it, and so it would turn off our target audience, and they wouldn't listen. And I heard a lot of negativity early on in that campaign before it became sort of hugely successful about why it wouldn't work and why we couldn't do it the way that we wanted to do it. So anyway, hopefully those are two very different but illustrative examples of the kind of risk-taking that we have been encouraging in the social change sector.
Doesn't look like we have any questions yet, folks. I'll encourage you to, oh, looks like we have one just submitted. This was from Karen. Thanks, Karen. How would an organization without these existing connections and not able to hire you, that's unfortunate, harness the cachet of the celebrities that you've been able to bring on board?
That's a good question. So the truth is, right, most organizations don't have enough money to hire us and don't have existing connections, right? So that's fairly typical of what's out there. I think so. I'd say two things. One is, and sort of the second part of our presentation is focused on the money, which is we do think there should be more money that goes into these kinds of projects because they're really successful. And artists in particular who are supported through these kinds of projects can really do amazing things when given the chance. So we'll talk about that in the second half. But I think in the meantime, if you're an organization that doesn't have the resources for it, one of the things that Miriam pointed out with the Fedoras campaign was that we worked both with the sort of celebrities and the high fashion folks, and we also had a piece that was really for non-celebrities, for working artists, and even for non-artists, for people to take their own photos. So I think on the one hand, there's a lot of creative campaigns that can be done that don't cost a lot of money, that can engage artists, and so we encourage folks to sort of continue to build those relationships. I do think, though, that there's sort of a mythology around celebrity that they're completely unapproachable, and that unless you know someone, it's impossible to reach them. And the truth is there are some good examples of organizations and individuals who have approached celebrities and asked them to get involved in a cause, and gotten an affirmative answer despite not having personal connections or money. A lot of celebrities will do this work for free, meaning they're rolling it for free, and we just encourage folks to be bold, and also to go to the artists that they want to work with a real openness to having the artist be involved in the creative side. We've done a lot of projects with Sarah Silverman, most of her political work we've done, and Sarah comes to us with ideas that she wants to implement, and we help sort of her think them through. And but that's there are a lot of artists who don't just want to show up in an event. They actually want to use their creativity on the issue that they care about, and we encourage people to keep that in mind when they're approaching folks.
That's a great answer. Thanks, Mik. And thanks for the question, Karen. It looks like we have no other questions for the time being. So, folks, I'm encouraging you to submit those throughout. We'll have another brief question and answer session towards the end. But until then, I'll pass it back to you guys.
Great. All right, so this is our second section. This is about funding and foundations, and where we should be putting money, and why cultural change is so important. So I want to start with a story about the ACA and healthcare reform, and I titled this slide "Losing While Winning Healthcare Reform," and it's my opinion, and I think the opinions of other people, that while the ACA managed to pass and be signed into law, that despite that victory, a lot of things were done wrong, and the American public overall does not actually support what was passed. And I want to talk a little bit about why I think that is, and how this is an example of how a different approach might have been better. So I'm going to go back to 2009, December of 2009, and if folks remember, in the summer of 2009 was the beginning of the Tea Party movement, which featured a lot of town hall meetings and confrontational encounters around healthcare reform. And through the fall, there were negotiations, and people had approached me about doing what they called a second schlep on healthcare. Couldn't we do something building on the great schlep that had just been a year before, that this time would be about healthcare? And so we came up with an idea eventually, and a couple of the organizations that were involved with the healthcare reform fight had said they would put up some money. And so I went to Los Angeles, and I met with Sarah Silverman, and sort of pitched her the idea about doing a second schlep. This would be really about trying to bridge the divide that existed between younger people who really needed healthcare and needed to sign up for healthcare, and older folks who in this country are largely insured because we have government healthcare for seniors. And that if you could create a sort of very public conversation between those two groups and create more of a connection by the seniors, that it was their grandkids, their family members who would benefit from this in part, that could help change the dynamic around the healthcare debate. So so this is I don't know, mid-December. I spent a few days in LA. By the end of the week, I had sort of a whole team of folks lined up and ready to do it. And on Friday, I get a call from the organizations that said they would put money into this, telling me that they had decided that they were going to pull the plug on the project, that they didn't want to do it. And the reason was because they had the votes in the Senate, and so they weren't going to continue to spend money on these kinds of projects or on this particular project. So I was disappointed, needless to say. I thought that regardless of whether or not they had the votes, that this was important because public opinion was important, and that we hadn't shifted to a place where people really understood, particularly seniors, but not just seniors, of why the ACA was so important and this could do a lot of good. But they said no, they pulled the money. Literally the next day, or on Sunday, I guess it was on Meet the Press, Joe Lieberman went on TV and basically said that he was pulling his support from the bill until certain changes had been made. And so the votes that they thought they had, they didn't have. A number of weeks later, Scott Brown won election in Massachusetts, and the Democrats no longer had 60 vote margin in the Senate. They only had 59, and it took a good number of weeks after that before they actually passed the bill. So that's the first part of my story. The second part of my story is moving up more recently, which is after the bill passed and we were looking at rollout this year, the White House, which is now sort of public information, started reaching out to a lot of folks who work in the space that we work in, working with artists, including folks who work in comedy, and said, you know, we need to sell the ACA, and in particular, we need to convince young people to sign up for it. We think you guys are, great creative minds, and we'd love for artists to be involved in this. Is there anything you can do? But oh, by the way, there is no money for it. The slide that you're seeing is the Between Two Ferns episode featuring Barack Obama that was released just a few weeks ago, which got a huge amount of media attention and views, and put the issue of young people and the ACA sort of back in the public eye, at least for a period of time. So this is one of the projects that sort of came out of that meeting, of that call. But there were many other projects, other great ideas that never happened because there was no money. There was no money coming from the White House, but perhaps even more importantly, there was no money coming from foundations, which isn't to say that there was actually no money. There may have been some small amount of money, but I heard from a number of people who were trying to do projects that could have had an impact, and they just needed a small amount of money, and they couldn't find funding for it. And I kept getting calls from people who wanted to know if I had money to support their projects, and I did not. So this is sort of one of those sad examples, because the failures around communications and changing the culture around healthcare and healthcare reform are not only really devastating for this issue narrowly, but it's actually caused real problems for the broader social change agenda. The ability to get anything done is hamstrung in part because the president's approval ratings have been so low because of the ACA, and there's just been no airspace to get anything done. So much attention and time has been focused on this, some of which could have been avoided if there had been a real serious investment in cultural change work over the last number of years to lay the groundwork for the passage of the ACA. So that's our first example. Mike, you want to go to the next one? So the second point that I wanted to raise is around where people are spending their time. And I think people know generally, like, yes, people spend more time, they watch TV and they're on their computers, but I just thought it'd be useful for folks to actually see what the numbers are. If you look at this, and this is fairly recent data, I think we've just reached the point now in 2013 where people spend more time on digital than on TV. They spend 5 hours and 16 minutes on digital, 4 hours and 31 minutes on TV, an hour and a half on radio, and 32 minutes on print, which breaks down between 18 minutes on newspapers and 14 minutes on magazines. I just think the investment in cultural change has to be aware of these trends and show a willingness to put money in the creation of content that can be seen on TV or video or other kinds of content that can be seen online through mobile devices or otherwise digitally. there's I think a continued sort of love of sort of placement of op-eds and getting articles in magazines, and while that still has some value, there has not been the shift in where we're investing our money has not reflected the shift in what the public is actually doing with their time. Next slide. Great. Miriam?
Great. So we wanted to include this example of the marriage equality movement as a really successful example of how cultural change really shifted political change in this country and was incredibly influential in all the advancements we've seen in recent years with the passage of marriage equality bills and other developments. So this is an example of both folks in the cultural sector really stepping up and in support of LGBT rights, and also nonprofit organizations that embrace culture as a strategy to advance their issue, and partnerships between nonprofits and cultural figures like Macklemore and others to really push for the legislative change that we've seen. So, and the example here really highlights how cultural change preceded political change. So there's just a few key moments on this timeline that I want to touch on. I won't get into all of them, but as you'll see on the top part are changes in the cultural space, and the bottom part is changes in the political space. So the first one is in 1985, GLAAD was formed to push back against New York Post's sensationalized coverage of the AIDS crisis. And 2 years after its founding, GLAAD celebrated a really important win when the New York Times changed their editorial policy to start using the word gay in place of homosexual. And this was a really big change, but for the LGBT movement, politics were still behind culture. Later on in the developments in the cultural space, in 1996, the hit sitcom Friends hosted television's first lesbian wedding. However, in the real world, it wasn't until 2004 that Massachusetts became the first state to legalize gay marriage. But through Friends, that example really started to make gay marriage seem like a reality for folks, and just kind of planting that seed in the public imaginations of what's possible. In 1997, Ellen DeGeneres came out. Her show was incredibly successful, and she's been a role model inspiration for others in the cultural space and outside of the cultural space. In 2008, Rachel Maddow became the first openly gay or lesbian anchor of a major primetime news program. Again, huge movement for the field. And in 2009, the federal law saw a shift when President Obama signed the Matthew Shepard and James Beard Jr. Act into law, expanding the existing federal hate crime law. However, this was 11 years after the murder of Matthew Shepard and 9 years after the premiere of the award-winning play, The Laramie Project. So again, The Laramie Project was a project of a nonprofit cultural institution highlighting this issue, and it took another 9 years for federal policy to follow suit. But a point that we like to make with culture is that you need to change culture with culture, and cultural change then shifts public opinion, which moves policy. So doing this cultural shift work was actually incredibly important to make this legislation possible. Later, more recently, in 2012, Macklemore and Ryan Lewis debuted their song Same Love in support of Washington's Referendum 74 to legalize gay marriage. It was the first top 40 hit to support marriage equality, and Referendum 74 passed. As of today, the YouTube music video has been viewed over 110 million times. So this is a really incredible example of a popular music icon partnering with an advocacy campaign to help move a state agenda forward, but really to make it become a national issue. I mean, the song has been viewed by folks across the country, throughout the world, and it was focused on one state's bill, but really obviously highlights the need to pass legislation in all 50 states and beyond. And so, as you see here, I mean, certainly the work of the nonprofits was supported by foundations, individuals. Funding support was really crucial to the advancements that nonprofits have been able to make in the cultural space in regards to marriage equality and LGBT rights. However, a lot of cultural actors stepped up on their own without the support of the foundation sector. And cultural interventions and the LGBT rights movement have been incredibly successful. This is an example that we can use as a model for other sectors. However, we can't expect that the cultural sector will step up on its own in support of other issues voluntarily. We really need to have foundation support, supporting organizations to develop cultural strategies, pursue these kind of collaborations with artists, to use the LGBT rights movement example as a model for other movements. Mick, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think that and we wanted to leave some time. We're down to about 10 minutes left, so we want to leave some time for questions. I think we, as Miriam said, we chose the marriage equality example because it feels like the impact that the cultural sector had in changing the way that people think about and see the LGBT community is so significant and was so instrumental in laying the groundwork for all the other change that we've seen that it feels like an excellent sort of case study in what we should be seeking to do in other sectors. And while there are obvious differences between the marriage, sort of the LGBT community and the marriage equality fight and some of the other campaigns that are going on, we think there are really important lessons here. And until the foundations are willing to make a serious commitment to support artists and cultural change strategies, we may get those sort of siloed victories. Like we may be able to line up the votes to pass something, but we won't win the hearts and minds of the community. So why don't we pause there again and leave a little bit of time at the end here for questions.
Great. Yes, folks, so we have a couple of minutes left. Please submit any questions you might have. You can see a picture. This child is bold, so take his example to heart. We have one question also submitted by Karen. She was just wondering if the Between Two Ferns project, or did it cost any money? Because I guess that's not totally clear. I'm sure there were some production costs. Do you have any knowledge of that, Mick?
Yeah, so I mean, the short answer, my understanding, and I actually haven't talked to the folks at Funny or Die about this recently, but my understanding was that they were willing to eat the costs over there in order to do the project, which is not something that most folks are able to do. But Funny or Die is a fairly large operation.
Right.
And the truth is, some of these other projects that I heard about from other artists and creative folks were not particularly expensive in the scheme of things. People looking for $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 total. And if you can put a really strong project together, you can reach not only millions of people that actually view or interact with your content, but tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of people who learn about it and are exposed to your message through the media coverage that comes with it. And that's always the ways in which the really smart and creative and powerful cultural content can generate media attention, usually with some help, but nonetheless, you expand your reach exponentially, and it's something that we do in our own practice, with our campaigns, but it's also something that you're more able to do when you have the kind of compelling content that artists are able to put together for you.
Great. I actually have a question for you guys. Beyond, let's say you're a funder, and beyond, obviously, the first thing we want to encourage folks to do is encourage their nonprofits to hire you guys and work with you guys. But beyond that, and what other options are there for funders to invest in culture and culture change? What does that look like?
So I can start, and then if you have anything to add, I think there's a few really concrete ways that foundations can invest in culture and cultural shift. One is thinking about you know your values as a foundation and the strategies that you feel are effective to invest in to bring about the change that you want to see. And we really feel like cultural strategy is a complement, an essential complement to organizing, advocacy, service delivery. Culture shouldn't be viewed as an extra thing you do if you have the time or the money, but it's actually a really essential piece of a holistic strategy to moving forward an agenda, creating change. So that's one thing. And as far as moving resources to the field, there's a few things funders can do. You can provide grants to your grantees that are for communication specific funding. What we found with our clients is that their communications infrastructure really shifts depending on the funding that they have. So if they have general operating support and there's some money in there, they can move to communications, they do that. If they lose the funding, they have to downsize, so providing communication specific funding on a consistent basis is really important. And letting your grantees know that you support them to take risks in their advocacy efforts and their communications. Providing trainings for your grantees around communications and specifically working for artists, understanding the value of culture and cultural strategy is incredibly important. Also providing grants and fellowships directly to artists and cultural producers to partner with nonprofits or to develop their own advocacy campaigns. That's really important. There's really limited funding, as I'm sure many of you know, for creative advocacy type projects. And there's a lot of artists out there that would like to be doing this kind of work, but they need to support themselves. And if the funding's not there, then they're unlikely to pursue those projects on their own. And it also can be really valuable to invest in a cultural strategy for a sector or for an individual organization. So giving your grantees the tools, the resources to develop a strategic plan for how they would integrate culture into their overarching advocacy goals.
Yeah, I see there's a question, so we should probably jump to that. I think also just if foundations make it clear to their grantees that the grantees won't be penalized for risk taking, which we think is goes hand in hand with pursuing a cultural strategy. There are very few that are without risk. The whole advantage of working in the cultural space is that you are really pushing the boundaries, and that's what culture can do in ways that sort of other spaces can't. That's really helpful because the fear of losing funding because a risk has been taken is very real and can really dissuade people from doing that.
Great, thanks for the answer, guys. We have another question from Sana. Thanks for that. She's wondering if we can explain how to translate media attention into action. And obviously a lot of times there's attention, but it doesn't necessarily translate. So she's wondering, one, how can we translate into action, and what mechanisms have you used or do you know that have been used to measure these kinds of changes?
Yeah, so those are great questions. I'll start, and then Miriam, if you want to add on to it. I think the first thing I'll say is, as I love the Between Two Ferns video, I thought it was great. I thought the media attention that it garnered was excellent. Unfortunately, those are really only two of what we consider to be, many more than two elements that you need to have in place to maximize the impact of, of a compelling piece of content like that. And Funny or Die, which is a really great site with a lot of good content, isn't set up to do that. So what we typically do for clients is, we usually build a microsite or integrate a space within their existing site to direct people that gives them a way to actually take action. So that can include, when we did the schlep, we created ways for people to self-organize trips to go to places to do voter persuasion and get out the vote work. On other sites, it's something as simple as as sort of petition signing, which is where the low-hanging fruit of online action. If it's connected to an organization, and the organization has a gathering they're doing, or a rally, or small group meetings, right? That those are that you put those opportunities in front of people. In terms of metrics. So anyway, so the answer to the first question is just to be explicit about what the action is that we want people to take, and providing them with really clear ways once they've viewed your content of doing that, and there shouldn't be one or more steps in between the two. On the second question around metrics, this is something we think about a lot. I think there's some really good and fairly easy to track metrics. I think it's important for organizations to decide ahead of time what their benchmarks are going to be, and then stick to them. So whether that's on sort of view count, or sort of more broadly what the reach is through media impressions. But there are ways that you can gauge how many people have have seen or shared or interacted with your content, and much more so obviously now given technology than there used to be. There are also, though, a lot of metrics that are beyond the capabilities of most nonprofits, because they cost money to figure out, including opinion polls, whether you're changing people's opinions, things along those lines around sort of the bigger cultural shifts. And we actually encourage foundations to keep that in mind, and to consider funding some of those things that don't get funded otherwise, including funding polls, or at least having questions within polls, so that they can track, over a period of time, what the change has been, before and after, a campaign or a project has started. And it's pretty rare that there's enough money to invest in that, and so I think there's data that we could have had that we don't have, because we're just not spending the money on it.
Okay, thanks for that answer, Mik. And I actually, looks like we don't have any more questions, but we're about 1 minute to 4, so it's probably a good time to wrap up. I want to thank you all for joining us, and remind you to please take just a minute or two and fill out the survey that you'll be prompted to answer right when this webinar ends. We're always looking for feedback and to improve our programs. And I want to thank Mik and Miriam for joining us. It's really been a pleasure to learn about what you guys are doing, and how we can use examples to invest in culture and take some more risks. So I really appreciate it, and I hope we maybe have you back in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, you can reach me or Mik via our website, moreandassociates.co, and Mike has our contact information.
I'll be sharing all that information in a follow-up email. So again, you'll have access to this webinar, to the slideshow, to the video, so you can see what's going on. And I'll make sure to include their contact information as well. So thanks everyone again, and we appreciate you joining us, and have a great rest of the day.